Greetings. Happy Sunday. Aquaba. We hope you are well on this Sunday, and we are glad that you are going to join us for this episode of Our Ancestors' Voices. This week, we're going to be talking about Obama, Qaddafi, Libya, and Africa. Very critical topic. Africa is on fire. And I just want to start by saying that, as we've said many times in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we have work study circles. If you are a member of this party, you have to participate in a work study circle, which means every 2 weeks you meet with people and you study and discuss materials and you talk about how we can plan the work to build the APRP and the African Revolution. Well, today, my cadre circle, we met. It was our day to meet. We are the Carmen Piera Cadre Circle, which is named after the great liberation fighter from the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the PAIGC, who led women combatants in the colonial war against the Portuguese and continued to work to build the PAIGC until her physical transition just a few short years ago. But when we got to our current events section today, we were able to, thanks to a video from Comrade Akabundu, we watched the interview with Sister Mawana Coyote, who was our longtime coordinator for our All African Women's Revolutionary Union. And today, September 3rd, represents the 21st commemoration of Sister Mawana's physical transition. So to honor her and her contribution, we watched this video today, and it really was inspirational for all of us, because she talked about, she looked directly into the camera and she said, this was happening when we were commemorating her life because she had cancer and we knew that her time was short. And so there was a party in Harlem, and that's where this interview took place that Comrade Akabundu did. And she looked right in the camera and she said, for those of you APRP cadre, build this party. Don't let anybody stop you. Get courageous. Don't be afraid. And that really resonated with me, because I listened to my ancestors. And today, 21 years after her physical transition, that message could not be any more on target. It could not be any more on target. What she was saying is stop all the nonsense, stop all the distractions, focus on our people's struggle for liberation, and understand that it's going to be a difficult struggle. Nobody said it was going to be easy. And that's what she was saying. And we know that, we hear that, but it's always good to hear it reiterated, especially the way it was done. And so I've been thinking about that all day and want to bring that spirit to what we're doing here. So we start by honoring our indigenous family members of the Western Hemisphere, their fight for their just struggle to get their land back. And of course, we acknowledge our African ancestors, which I just gave a wonderful example. Comrade Sister Mawana Coyote, rest in power. She was talking in the video about how she was packing her house up to move to Gambia, which she did. And she made her physical transition there in Gambia, in West Africa. And I actually had the honor and privilege of visiting her final resting place some years ago when I was over there. But her message really resonates, and I want to continue to have it resonate because it's important that we remember that we have everything we need to fight this struggle. So I'll start with just our usual introductions for our program so we can get it started. Just here you have some of the methods in which you can donate to the APRP, so we encourage you to do that. Our Ancestors' Voices is sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, APRP. APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan-African political party based in Africa. Our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa. Nothing easy about any of that. It's going to be a constant struggle. And so for people that look for the easy way out in life, this is not an organization for you. This is not a struggle for you. This really isn't even a life for you. You might want to think about doing something else, because this is going to be a difficult struggle. And we're up for it because we know that our ancestors had it much more difficult than we do. And we are honored that they did the work they did, the sacrifices they gave to put us in a position where we could continue to work to make our contribution, our humble contribution. So our work to achieve Pan-Africanism, it's outlined, it's not off the top of the head, it's not opinionated, it's not based upon a TikTok video, it's based upon a scientific study of our history and culture and experiences as African people, and what it will take to resolve the problems, what the source of the problems are that we have, and what it will take to resolve those problems. So all of that is documented, and that's what we follow to engage in our work. And this program is one of many that's hosted by the APRP, by myself and Shakura. We are biological father-daughter and both organizers in the APRP. So to get us started, we're talking today about Obama, Qaddafi, Libya, and Africa. I will turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really excited to talk about today's seminar topic because it's important for us to continue lifting up Africa as much as we can, lifting up what really happened, lifting up the background of Africa, which allowed us to get to the point we're at today, and also continuing to center Africa, especially when European colonizing and European imperialism are trying really hard and working really hard to continue masking Africa and to continue submerging the continent and all of the resources and information that is associated with that continent. So this topic is extremely important. It's also one of my maybe top 3 favorite seminar topics because it just speaks to how resourceful we are as a people and how we were able to do so much to help not just one individual in Libya, but to help the masses of people with a resource that we all should have access to no matter what. But we will talk more about that in a couple of slides. For now, I need to kind of set the foundation for why we're talking about this topic by explaining to you that before September of 1969, Libya existed like all other Africa in general, and North Africa in particular, as basically an oblivion to the Western world before the oil companies, besides the oil companies, excuse me, who had vested interest there. Several decades before, plentiful and quality oil reserves had been discovered throughout Libya, and to ensure that imperialism, primarily the US, British, French, and Italian imperialism, had full and unfettered access to profit from that oil like they do every resource in Africa. The neo-colonial government of King Idris was established. So King Idris was put into power because the US, the French, the British, and the Italians backed what Idris's plan was. And they had the same interests as Idris, which made it even easier for Idris to rule with an iron fist. This took place between December of 1951 through most of 1969. And King Idris was very much in control and brutally repressed any opposition to his rule. He didn't have the king in his title for nothing. And so, as I said, he ruled with an iron fist and didn't want to give away that power as easily as we might have thought. So because he ruled with an iron fist, he didn't permit because he ruled with an iron fist, he was consenting for imperialism to take its course because he benefited from imperialism and imperialism benefited from him being in the position of power, because that's what imperialists need, is other folks who are still promoting colonization only in a neo-colonizing form. So that took place. And so because of that, there was this permission for imperialism to continue to steal Libya's access to oil wealth. So Libya had a massive oil wealth access. And during that time, all other neo-colonizing leaders, they were all in the same boat with understanding that they needed to protect their resources so that they could continue to profit. And so Idris was no different. He was quite satisfied to shave off enough for himself, his family, and his minions. But of course, the entire masses of the people of Libya, they suffered and they had nothing to show. Chevron Oil was established as the primary oil drilling and producing company in Libya. And during those times, there were about 40% of annual revenues were generated from oil produced from Libya. So we know that Chevron was in Libya. We know that the masses of people could have benefited greatly from the profit and the resources that that oil provided. And we know that Idris was a puppet put in place of power so that the British, the French, the US, and the Italians could continue to use that oil to profit their own personal gain and to profit the personal gain of their family members as well. Meanwhile, the Libyan people would be able to have no access to the control of their resource or the control of their land, which is why we continue to say every weekend that joining an organization working for justice is so critical. It is so, so critical, because if you have the ability to join an organization working for justice, then you are in a better position to start to unpack just how critical there is so much knowledge out there that we simply do not have in our repertoire. So that means if you're in an organization that's working for justice, then you're starting to increase your political education, which means you're starting to learn all the things that were hidden from you. You're starting to learn all the truths that were never going to come to light because they were buried so deeply. And you're starting to learn that Libya is not a poor country like people might think. Neither is Africa in terms of it being a poor continent. And so these are some of the truths that I'm talking about. This is why European imperialism benefits so much from ignorance. Because if we don't have access to our own information, and if we choose not to have access, I should say, then we're not really in a position to resist the European colonizer or the European neo-colonizer or the European imperialist system. And so we have to think about that on a really large scale, because joining an organization working for justice, yes, it will benefit us individually, but we can also collectively benefit from that because we can start to obtain ownership of our own land. And if we start to obtain ownership of our own land, then we should understand what comes from our land, i.e. oil, or gold, or cacao, or coltan, or cobalt, or rubber. Go on and take your pick, because there's plenty of resources that come from Africa. But the only way a person would really know that is by really doing their research in that organization that's working for justice, and doing that research with other individuals who are also collectively working, because they too want to join an organization that's working for justice. And more importantly, if you're in an organization that's working for justice, you should have some type of common goal. Whereas if you take the All African People's Revolutionary Party, we are trying to build up Mother Africa and get every single neo-colonizer out, because we want Africans to have control of Africa, and we want the resources that Africa produces to be in control of Africans, so that we can benefit from what's coming from our continent. There's no reason that we should be suffering from poverty or mortality rates or infant mortality rates. There's no reason we should suffer from cancer rates. There's no reason we should suffer from diabetes, hypertension. There's no reason that we should suffer from mental health illnesses. There's no reason that we should have spinal issues and rickets and all the other things that our people are suffering from on the continent, but also in the diaspora. There is no reason. Africa is the richest continent on the planet, hands down. And we have access to some of the best medicine, some of the best information and education, and all of the land, especially because of our connections with our other African countries, such as Cuba and Haiti and other places like that. So we need to take control back of our land. And the first step to doing that is joining an organization that's working for justice. Next slide, please. Now, we can take a page out of this person's picture here that you see. We could take a page out of their book. This would be Muammar Gaddafi. And we can take a page out of Muammar's book, that on September 1st, 1969, a junior officer in the Libyan military named Muammar Gaddafi led a quick and efficient military overthrow of King Idris. Thank you, Muammar Gaddafi, because we knew that Idris had to get up out of there. So on September 1st, 1969, that's exactly what they were able to do, is remove that sellout out of the office space and get him up out of there. And so because of that overthrow, from that point forward, the Libyan Jamahiriya was established. I know you'll correct me if I said that wrong, Daddy. It was established, and the most common translation of the word Jamaria to English roughly translates, quote, state of the masses, end quote. One of the first acts of the Jamaria was to nationalize Chevron's control of Libya. So I want to recap real quick. Not only was the intention to remove Idris, and they were able to do that and overthrow him because Muammar led an effective military to do that. So again, we're talking about collective people working together. We're not talking about one person who took out Idris. We're talking about many people who worked together collectively to do this, which means that they were also in some sort of organizing communication where they understood they had one unified goal and that was what it was. And so then from there, they were able to name themselves the Libyan Jamaria, which meant the state of the masses. So this whole organization and the whole name of choosing Jamaria was to support that they wanted to work together for the same people who had been exploited by the resource of the oil in the first place. They were now benefiting from that same resource that had exploited them earlier. And so if we think about the state of masses, one of the first acts, as I said, was that the Jamaria was able to nationalize Chevron's control of Libya. So they flipped it, you all. Instead of Chevron continuing to profit, the Libyan Jamaria was able to make it so that the people of Libya were able to profit off of the oil's resources, basically. So to nationalize Chevron's control of Libya's oil industry, and as the new government proclaimed, use the national resources of the Libyan people to advance Libya and Africa. So we don't want to hear that, we just need to subdue to capitalism. We don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear that there's no one here to save us. We don't want to hear that. And we don't want to hear that, we just need to understand that this is just how things are now. We don't want to hear that, because this didn't happen in the 1800s. It didn't happen in, 1594. This happened in 1969. This happened in the late 1960s. So we know that it is possible that when Africans come together and organize, or I should say colonize people, or marginalized genders, or differently abled people, or whoever you identify with, if you are considered poor and impoverished, when you come together and you organize with other people who have like minds as you, and who are sick of being oppressed just like you are, there's no stopping what you all are capable of doing. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to help you all understand is, even if you don't join our organization that's working for justice, we just ask that you join some organization. Any organization will do, as long as it's working for justice, because we have a responsibility where we need to try to develop as many more Jamarias as possible. In 2023, it is so necessary to develop as many state of the masses organizations as possible. I don't think we can have too many, quite frankly. If they're all working to achieve one unified socialist Africa, or one unified socialist indigenous space, or one unified socialist Asian space, or whatever the intention is of the work, that means that it's going to benefit all people who have lost their land, which means that all these people that don't have their land will now have power coming back to them, because they will own their land and they will determine how the resources are spent on that land. That's going to be huge, because after all of these years of oppression, it's going to be so refreshing to be able to have some decision in terms of how the resources are spent. And people are going to have to treat us differently. They're not going to have a choice, because Africa's not going to be under attack anymore. So I just want to close by saying this is such an incredible piece of literature that we have access to know what happened on September 1st, 1969. As I said, this not only affected how Chevron was exploiting the resource and not supporting the masses of people, but it was an opportunity for the masses to decide how to take those resources and bring them back into where they needed them the most, so that they themselves as Libyan people could advance. But they didn't just advance their particular country, they advanced the whole continent, because that's the purpose of one unified socialist Africa. Is Libyans understood that Chevron was not just a resource that they should benefit from, it was a resource that all Africans should benefit from. Because Africa is one continent, and we need all Africans to be free, not just Libyans, not just Zimbabweans, not just Ghanaians, but we need every single African to be free of neo-colonizers, and to understand that they have a role and a responsibility to advance the conditions of Africa and to maintain them so that the neo-colonizers do not come back. With that, I will close, but we will ask you again to join an organization that is working for justice. Now is the time. You are the ones you've been waiting for.
Ashe, thank you very much. And I think that history is so important as we talk about what that means and break some of that down, like what happened in Libya after September 1st, 1969, and the great Libyan Revolution was institutionalized. And we'll start with just looking at the Green Book, if you are able to see your screen. That was the book that was written by Muammar Gaddafi and served as the pathway for the establishment of the Libyan Jamahiriya, similar to when we say Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare is our pathway for building one unified socialist Africa. The Green Book served that purpose for the Libyan Jamahiriya, the revolution there. So just talking briefly about some aspects of the Jamahiriya and what they were trying to do once they established the September 1st, 1969 revolution. As I said, a lot of what that looked like was based on what they had in the Green Book. And in the Green Book, they had an economic philosophical foundation that talked about the need to eradicate capitalism and to look for a socialist solution, which just simply means where the people own and control the means of production that are used to facilitate a society. And then they also talked in the Green Book about they didn't believe in political parties. Now, this is obviously something that, we would have contention with them, and something that we struggled with the Libyan Jamahiriya on for a number of years, but that was their belief, that they didn't believe in political parties, and they saw the Jamahiriya as a mass assemblance of Libyan people that represented the society that they lived in. And Muammar Gaddafi himself never held any official position in Libya. Like, you listen to the Western imperialist media and they talked about he's the president of Libya, he's the dictator of Libya, he's the ruler of Libya, all these things that they love to say. But he never held any official position. His official position was just simply that as the one of the original founders of the Libyan Jamahiriya. And so the government was quickly affirmed through a referendum process. And that's very important. And I know, people in the West know nothing about referendums, because in this capitalist society, you're taught that you go to a ballot box every 2 to 4 years and you cast a ballot for some capitalist politician. I was looking at a video the other day, and we're so goddamn stupid right now. This was a young African woman, and she was on there with that coon Larry Elder. If you don't know him, he's one of many coons here in California, a white man's coon, and he ran for governor a couple of years ago. In 2021 here, and he's a right-wing Negro coon, a Jezebel, step and fetch it Negro, right-wing talking point type Negro coon. And so she's on this show with that whatever the hell his name, Charlemagne, the coon, another coon. They have some kind of Breakfast Club talk show, some coon show that's endorsed by corporations. And he had one coon, had another coon on there, and they had this sister on, this young sister. And so she's asking this coon, Larry Elder, what is the, please tell us because he's, his argument, these right-wing talking points is that, we have all this control in all these cities, talking about African people. And so all these cities are messed up. Like, he used the example of Baltimore, Maryland, here in the United States. It's messed up, and they have an African mayor. This is what he said. It's not what I'm saying. They have an African mayor. They have an African police chief. So in his backward coon ideology, that means that, these Africans are clear examples that we don't know how to properly govern in these communities where our people are the dominant population. And so this young sister accurately and correctly challenged him. She said, well, name one institute, like who, because his point is that all these Africans are in the Democratic Party, which is true. That's a problem. We don't want them in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. We don't want them in any of those capitalist parties. But his point was that, all these Africans are in the Democratic Party. And so her question was, well, who controls the Democratic Party? And then they got into all this back and forth nonsense and never answered her question. And so she answered it herself. And she said, well, we don't control the agenda and the program of the Democratic Party. And she wouldn't let him talk, which I think is totally appropriate. You shouldn't let a coon talk. And she was speaking truth, that we don't control the Democratic or Republican Party. We don't control the capitalist system. African people don't control that. Indigenous people don't control that. The majority of white people, dumb as hell as they are, don't control the capitalist system. That's just an objective fact. And these coons, well, they were, oh, something's wrong with her. And I don't know what the hell. If I saw him, I'd probably go to jail slapping the hell out of him, but Charlem, whatever the hell, y'all know who he is, because you watch that nonsense. This is why, to the other coon, this is why you don't like to talk to Black women. Now, to me, those coons should be lined up, and you know what? I mean, that's all the good that they have. That sister, there's nothing wrong with what she said. And so her point is that in a system where there's democracy, the people control the institutions. In this backward, decadent society, we don't control the Democratic Party. African people don't dictate what happens in the Democratic Party and what the Democratic Party does, because if we did, the primary objective of the Democratic Party would be to create a national jobs bill, to have some fierce enforcement of anti-white supremacy legislation. The Democratic Party has never done anything like that, and it never will. The Republican Party has never done anything like that, and it never will. We don't control these institutions. These corporations control these institutions. J.P. Morgan Chase controls the Democratic Party. These are the types of institutions. The Rockefeller family, who owned J.P. Morgan Chase and Chevron Oil, they were already, Shakur just told you, was dominating Libya before the Libyan Revolution. Those are the entities that control the Democratic Party. Coon Larry Elder, Coon Charlotte Coon, whatever the hell your name is, that's who controls the capitalist system. So what Libya did is they had a referendum. So we have all these military coups happening in Africa right now, right? We've had one in Burkina Faso. We've had one in Niger. We've had one in Mali. We've had one in Gabon. The most recent one last week, I believe it was, we had one in Chad, which is the country just south of Libya. And so you didn't hear anything about the one in Chad because that's a pro-imperialist coup d'etat, where they toppled the leader and inserted, these other clowns that are better suited to represent imperialism. The difference with these coup d'etats, like in Gabon and Chad, and the one in Libya in September of 1969, is that Qaddafi didn't come to power as a military leader and then just maintain power as a military leader like all these other places in Africa. They had a referendum. And what a referendum is they had a national vote. And the purpose of that national vote was to determine, do the people, first they instituted all of these policies. Number one, like Shakur said, they nationalized, they took control of the oil from Chevron, told Chevron, you can stay here, but only if you work in the interest of the Libyan people's Jamahiriya's desire on how we want to use the oil. If you can't do that, get the hell out of here. And that's what they did. And they nationalized the oil, and that gave them the wealth to do a number of things, to make healthcare free in Libya. That's what they did. To provide money to families that started out so they could have the opportunity to get somewhere to live and get started as a young family. They did that. They made education free, so you didn't have to pay. They did that. They allowed women for the first time to begin to go and get educated and become whatever they wanted to become. They did that with the oil well. And so then they had a referendum to ask the people, is this what you want to see happen in Libya? And the people voted overwhelmingly. Millions of people, some 90% of the people participated in the referendum, about 10 million people. And they said, yes, we want to see the Libyan Jamahiriya continue. And we want to see Muammar Gaddafi continue as our spiritual leader, which is what they called him during his time in Libya. And they did that. And he had multiple referendums. They didn't just have one, they had multiple referendums. And the importance of that is it took what they did in September 1st, 1969, and expanded it so it's no longer just a simple military coup d'etat like what you see in Gabon and Chad last week, but now it's become a people's movement. And we've had a couple of those in Africa. We've had that in Libya, as we're talking to you about right now. We had it in Burkina Faso under Thomas Sankara. And we hopefully, potentially, you'll see the same type of democratic, implementation in what they're doing in Burkina Faso and Mali, and what's happening there. So this is what the Libyan Jamahiriya did to legitimize what happened in September of 1969. And the oil wealth, as I mentioned, was redistributed through socialist means. And the money was provided for the families, free education, free healthcare. They were building a socialist society, you all, where people are more important than profit. And the corporations were put on notice. You respect our people first society, or you get the hell out. And that's exactly what should happen. Who in their right mind would be against that? And like I mentioned, oppression of women was challenged. And then we want to talk about areas that they highlighted for a lot of their services in Libya, the Bedouin Desert, which is where Qaddafi was from. And the importance of that region in Libya is that that's where most of the dark-skinned Libyans live, which you would call Black people. That's where they live. And so they had a specific focus on uplifting the conditions of those people, making sure that all of these policies we're talking to you about were implemented primarily in that area, in that desert region in Libya. And this is the reason why the core of support for the Libyan Jamahiriya came from those dark-skinned Libyans, or Black people, as you would call them, the Africans there, because they saw, as revolutions should do, they benefit the people on the bottom of the society. And that's what happened with the Libyan Jamahiriya. I know that none of this you knew. Don't front, oh, I know all about it. You don't know a damn thing, because nothing in this society is designed to educate you about what happens in Africa, particularly from a people's perspective, from a perspective of trying to do something to improve the conditions for the masses of people. Nothing here educates anybody here about that. The only thing you're going to get here is that, well, the big-head Negro babies are dying, so donate 88 cents a day, and we'll feed them some decrepit food that is not even food that we could sell in the United States of America. We'll give it to those Negroes, to those slaves, and they'll eat it, and you'll feel good like you're doing something to help. That's what people here understand about Africa. And I'm not, you could say, oh, you sure are mean, but you know, if you pay attention, I go to Africa all the time, and every time I go, I have to hear the dumbass statements people make. Well, are you going to see any lions, any animals? And I always tell them, well, why do I have to go to Africa to see savage animals when the most savage animals on earth are the people that live in this backward ass country? So if I want to see some savagery, all I got to do is walk out my front door and I can see all the savagery I want to see. So I don't have to go to Africa to see animals that are primitive. I can see the most primitive animals on earth right here in the United States of America. So this is the important context in which to evaluate what the Libyan Jamahiriya did. And I want to make a point that the picture you're looking at here is of Muammar Gaddafi in February of 1985. And what's happening here, you all, is the Libyan Jamahiriya was committed not just because there's a lot of confusion among Africans. You know, a lot of us are, we call ourselves pro-Black, but the evidence doesn't support that. So we don't like, any North Africa, where Arab populations have dominant populations. We don't see that as something that we want to relate to. So I want to make the point that the Libyan Jamahiriya was certainly committed to the African continent much more than it was committed to the Middle East. And not only that, it was committed to the upliftment of African people everywhere. So the picture you're looking at here is February 1985, when Muammar Qaddafi was live streamed, or they used to call it closed circuit then, into the Nation of Islam's annual Savior's Day event in Chicago, Illinois. And in this presentation, if you look at the history, Qaddafi is telling African people in this country, get out of the US military and join the African Revolution, and Libya will give you arms to fight against the United Snakes of America. So if you understand that and you do that history and you look this up for yourself, we're not asking you to believe us, because most of you, if the imperialists aren't saying it, if the European capitalists aren't saying it, you don't have the capacity to believe it. So go ahead and look, even they will tell you what I just said is true. So, this is the reason why they hated Qaddafi, and they hated the Libyan Jamahiriya. And I remember that Minister Louis Farrakhan, who had hosted the Savior's Day, of course, as the leader of the Nation of Islam, he was on the Phil Donahue show. And to show you how arrogant these crackers are, Donahue had the audacity to challenge him about having Qaddafi at the Savior's Day, talking about giving arms to Africans here to fight against the U.S. government. And Farrakhan said, well, let's name the countries the U.S. gives arms to overthrow countries. The Contras in Nicaragua, the people in El Salvador, constantly giving these criminal thugs in Florida who have been trying to overthrow the Cuban Revolution for 62 years. The U.S. government had all over Africa, the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, the coup d'etat of Vito Quito in Mali. I'm sorry, in Mali, and the assassination of Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso, the assassination of Amilcar Cabral in Guinea-Bissau, the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah's government in Ghana, the sabotage against the Democratic Party of Guinea. I mean, we can go on and on and on, and that's what Farrakhan told Donahue on his show. Who the hell are you to try to impose some morality? If you have the right to sabotage what's happening in other countries, then we have a right to seek help from people that want to help us when you're not willing to do anything but oppress and exploit us. So this is a question of us liberating our minds. And this is to Shakura's constant point that she makes every week, all program rather, is that if you're not engaged in a political education process, you'll be dumb as hell like they want you to be. Well, yeah, he shouldn't have asked us to do that. We can't fight against the U.S. government. This good white man, we can't do nothing against him. Best we could do is open our mouths under the table and hope them crumbs he push off, we catch some of them. That's the best mentality you're ever going to have, as long as you're not engaged in a consistent process to make sure you understand the world from a revolutionary African personality perspective, or whatever perspective your culture can offer that's contrary to the capitalist system, that can give you a different perspective of what we need to do to get free. And so we'll talk about just some great accomplishments of the Libyan Jamahiriya. One, they did maintain principled support for liberation movements based in land liberation. Now, they supported the most radical elements of the Palestinian movement. And again, I know people in the West don't know anything about the history of the Palestinian people and their struggle for liberation against the Zionist state of Israel. And we can't tell you everything in 60 minutes, but we will tell you that there have always been, like in everybody's struggle, different tendencies. There in the African struggle, if you look at organizations like the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and then there's other organizations like the All African People's Revolutionary Party. We all don't think the same. We all engage in organizing work. This is a good thing. and the masses of people can determine for themselves what they think the correct course of action should be. So that's the reason why we don't tell people don't join the NAACP. If they're not in any organization, we prefer they be in the NAACP than in no organization, because the only way that they can come to understand what the AAPRP is talking about is by having some kind of organizational experience, whether it's the NAACP or whoever the hell it is. And if they don't have any organization experience, then the best we can get is the kind of nonsensical idiocy that you see on social media when people are talking about our people's struggle. So the Libyan Jamahiriya supported the most radical elements of the Palestinian movement, like the former popular movement for the liberation of Palestine, the Democratic Movement for the Liberation of Palestine, and those type, the Palestinian Communist Party, and they supported it. They didn't support Al-Fatah, which was the largest element of the Palestinian movement at that time, the Palestine Liberation Organization, led for a long period of years by Yasser Arafat. They didn't support that. They were on a more radical element of support for the Palestinian people, but they did support Palestinian self-determination, which is a good thing. And they did that long before it was popular. Everybody today, acts like they always supported the Palestinians, but back in that time, in the 80s, there were only a few elements that spoke out in support of the Palestinians. We know that because we were one of those few elements. So the Libyan Jamahiriya was certainly in that camp, and they deserve credit for that. And as I mentioned, they actively always supported African liberation movements, long before it was popular. When I was a student in college, I got physically removed from a rally at Sacramento State University, where I went to school, by the Secret Service, because they had that Geraldine Ferraro woman was running for vice president on the Democratic Party ticket, and she was speaking in the Library Quad there in 1984. And I was out there with some of the comrades, and this piece of scum stood there. It's 1984, y'all. This is 40 years ago. This piece of scum sat out there and said, we need to make sure that we're standing up to terrorist organizations like the PLO and the ANC. And she was talking about, of course, the Palestine Liberation Organization, and she was talking about the African National Congress, which, of course, is the organization of Nelson Mandela and the organization that eventually came to power in Azania, or what you call by the colonial name, South Africa. But at that time, those liberation movements were looked at as terrorist groups. And so I yelled out and they removed me. But my point is that at that time, Libya was providing material assistance to the African National Congress and the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, which is one of our sibling parties, and the Azanian People's Organization, one of our sibling parties, the Black Consciousness Movement of Steve Biko. They were doing that 40 years ago. So they were concretely supporting the African liberation movement. When most Negroes were sitting around here talking about voting for some coon for office, they were providing practical support for the African Revolution. The Libyan Jamahiriya was doing that. And so these are the reasons why imperialism has targeted the Libyan Jamahiriya. And we've studied history. We don't go by sound bites. So we know that there's a high probability that Libya was responsible for shooting down the airplane, the Scottish airplane, the Lockerbie incident, and that should not have happened. We don't support quote unquote terrorist acts. We don't think it's productive. We think that what needs to happen is revolution, and a lot of times people are impatient. And the Libyan Jamahiriya, maybe it's probable that they were guilty of that, impatient. So they engaged in some of these activities that they felt at that time would expedite the struggle for justice and liberation. But I don't think that these types of actions are best suited to do that. The only way that we can get where we need to be is we have to be able, to ensure that the masses of people are politically educated. And once that happens, we don't have to have 2 or 3 people carry out an act to try to make a political statement. We can organize the masses of people and walk right over imperialism's chest. So Libya was not perfect, and they made other mistakes. They were involved in we're objective, we're revolutionaries. We're not sentimental like a lot of people out here. So they made other errors. Their involvement in the Liberian crisis and the crisis in Sierra Leone in the 90s, questionable. Their involvement in East Africa, questionable. They weren't perfect, but they were sincerely attempting to make an effort based on what they understood the conditions to be at the time to engage in a struggle to help Africa develop its own self-determination. And so, although imperialism will tell you that the reason why they destroyed Libya is because of the Lockerbie incident and things like that, that's not why they, how can the chief terrorist country on earth say that they have to get rid of a country because they accuse them of terrorism? No country in the history of human civilization has engaged in more terrorist activity than the United States of America. So if you are so stupid that you sit there and believe that, well, they stopped Libya because they was terrorists, then you're just a dumb ass. Okay. And the best thing that you can do to help humanity, if you're not willing to do any work to correct that, the best recommendation we can make for you is to fill up your sink in scalding hot water and dip your head in it. And at least then, as Kwame Ture used to say, if you're not going to do anything to contribute to humanity, then while you're living, then at least you can die. The way he used to say it, I say it the way he said it. He said, if you're not going to join an organization working for humanity, then call up the neo-Nazis and give them your address and tell them, when you get ready to lynch an African, come and get me, because I'm not willing to do anything to help my people other than run my damn mouth. So at least when you get ready to kill one of us, like that terrorist did last week, come and get me, because I'm not doing any damn thing to help the people out anyway. So that's exactly correct. And if that offends you, that's because you're on the wrong side of the fence. And I'm glad it offends you. I hope it burns you up, because we got to get serious about understanding the forces in this world who are working against us. And imperialism destroyed Libya because although they were not perfect, like none of us are, they were certainly making inroads to try to address these problems in an organized fashion. And certainly the death knell to their efforts was their effort to create one African currency. Everybody's the expert on this now, but the point of this is that Libya, and that's great. I'm glad people are reading articles and everything, but the whole point of it is that people were missing. Everybody knows Libya wanted to create an African currency to replace all of the African currencies throughout the African continent with one currency that would be backed by Libyan gold bullion. And this is a primary reason why the Obama administration destroyed the Libyan Jamahiriya and assassinated Muammar Qaddafi. All of that is true. But what people who know that miss, because you're not an organization, so you're only seeing it from a piecemeal perspective, is that we have to understand that the way that we stop them from sabotaging us is getting all of us engaged in this struggle. They can kill Muammar Gaddafi, but they can't, as Fred Hampton said, they can kill the revolutionary, they can't kill the revolution. And what that means is that the revolution is all of us. They can't kill all of us. So yeah, they were able to temporarily sideline our quest to have one African currency, but I would argue it was probably out of order anyway, because what needs to happen first is the masses of African people have to be politically educated to understand the importance of how an African currency that's strong and backed by African resources would help us, put us in a position to have a United States of Africa and solve all of our problems. The reason why they're able to sabotage us like that is because most of us don't understand what I just said. So all they have to do is go on TV or wherever the hell you get your information from or misinformation and say that, well, this guy's a terrorist. He's terrorizing. He's Arab. He doesn't even like black people. And most of us are so goddamn stupid, we believe it. Oh, okay. Well, that's why Obama took him out. And all Obama has to do is smile and when we stay together and sing a few lines from a goddamn song. That's all it takes for us. So most of us are so stupid. And I kill Qaddafi, and you don't know a damn thing. And that's all it takes. And we're good with that. We're like, okay, well, that's okay. I'm not going to worry too much about that. But if the masses of people were organized and educated, we would understand that we can make this happen better and do this again. And one day we will. And another thing is the International Mataba, which was a collection of international revolutionaries in Libya, of which the APRP was a part of, the American Indian Movement was a part of, the Palestine Liberation Organization was a part of, the Irish Republican Socialist Party was a part of. All of these liberation movements. We don't feel like the communist internationals represented our interests. So Libya played a role in helping us establish our own platform to organize on an international revolutionary basis. And the APRP participated at the highest level of the Mataba. And this served a genuine purpose. This is the whole thing that I talked about with Qaddafi and Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. That came through the Mataba. And we played a critical role. In 1986, when the US, under that criminal pirate Ronald Reagan, bombed Libya, the APRP stepped out in the presence of Kwame Ture and our Central Committee and organized a delegation of people to go to Libya in defiance of the travel ban to Libya. And Kwame Ture asked Minister Farrakhan to lead that delegation. And there were a number of delegations that went to Libya. And that's how, we were able to further develop the relationship with the Libyan Jamahiriya. And the Mataba was a very essential aspect of that. I know we don't know anything about any of this, but it's important history. That's why we're here doing our absolute best to provide it to you, because if we don't take this and then you don't take it and engage in a process so you can learn more about it, then we're just playing games. We're not serious about liberation. And of course, the picture on the screen is the great man-made river, as they called it, where Libya used its massive oil wealth to build these pipelines all throughout North Africa so that there would be potable water throughout the Sahara Desert. People who had never had potable water had potable water 20 years ago. And I've mentioned Chad, they just had a coup d'etat there. The people of Chad benefited immensely. Chad is all run through by the Sahara Desert and all those countries, Sudan. They had this potable water. They were able to have clean, fresh drinking water, water to bathe in. All of this was able to happen. And this was a wonderful thing. And that's why if you go to Africa, if you go to that region of Africa today, don't take my word for it, just go there, go to Chad and try to talk negative about Muammar Gaddafi. Because you going over there because you got a PhD from CNN and Fox News and all this other worthless piece of garbage. And so you think you know about Qaddafi and the Jamahiriya, you go over there and try to say something about Muammar Gaddafi. Those people had clean drinking water because of the Libyan Jamahiriya. Your church organizations didn't provide them any damn clean drinking water. Your damn Democratic Party didn't do it. Your imperialist United Nations didn't do it. None of those entities did it. It was the Libyan Jamahiriya that did it. And people ain't stupid. They know that. And the Jamahiriya, as I mentioned, raised up the so-called African Black population in Libya, ensured that they had the resources to raise their conditions, right? And, this community served as the core support for the Jamahiriya. No question about that. And so in 2011, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization engaged in systemic terrorism to destroy the Libyan Jamahiriya. And in the process of doing that, not only did they destroy the ability of Libya to create the dinar, the one African currency, but they stole all of the gold bullion, so that would no longer be available as a resource to help African people do what it was designed to do to support the Libyan dinar currency or the African currency. They stole the bullion. Obama probably got it in his house, some of it. They did that. They destroyed these pipelines you're looking at, no longer exist. There's no more potable water in the Sahara Desert region of Africa. NATO planes, I'm talking about the United States, Britain, France, all of these goddamn criminals, They bombed the hell out of North Africa to destroy the pipeline, specifically to do that, to destroy it. They did that. It no longer exists. They put these criminals in charge in Libya after they found Qaddafi because of the satellites that NATO used. They found him in the drains and they flushed him out and assassinated him and turned him over to the criminal element there. And now Libya, which was once probably the safest place in Africa, probably the place where the most potential exists, now it's an absolute madhouse. It's like an apocalypse. You're not safe anywhere there. And guess who the most unsafe people are? The people from the Bedouin region, the so-called Black people, are the most unsafe people in Libya. So all of this terrorism, like the level of slavery, kidnapping our young sisters and putting them into forcing them to, become sex slaves and doing that to our young women. All of this is standard fare in Libya today. And guess whose damn fault it is? Your black ass president, Barack Obama. That's who did this. So all of you who, well, I don't understand why you don't like Obama. Feel that sink up with that scalding water and stick your damn head in it until you stop breathing. Because that's what good you are to us at this point. You still raising up this black bastard, and he has done nothing but engage in terrorism against our people. And we're going to tell the truth about it. We don't care what they do. We know we're listening. We don't give a damn. We're going to tell the truth. We're not cowards like so many people out here. We're going to tell the damn truth and talk about what happened and continue to tell the truth, because we know that once our people get the truth, our people will organize and act on the truth, and we can stop this nonsense once and for all. So we want to invite you back next week. September, we're going to continue the truth telling. Sunday, September 10th, 9/11, the tall tale that keeps growing. We're going to talk about how all these people that support the U.S. capitalist government's version of what happened September 11th, 2001 are quick to criticize what they call conspiracy theories. And our position is the most dominant conspiracy theory is that 19 hijackers from Iraq and Kuwait, or wherever the hell they said they were supposed to be, hijacked 3 planes. That's the best conspiracy theory. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. Go to aprp-intl.org. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Go to betterworld.me. These videos will be available. Go to hoodcommunist.org. Support our programs in Burkina Faso. You can go to our sites there and get more information about how you can do that. Please do that. It's very important. And projects we have everywhere else throughout the African continent. Support all of our programs. They're there to inform and to engage in this type of ideological struggle. That's what we're going to do, because we have to agitate. We have to tell the truth. We have to be uncomfortable. We have to do what's necessary. Our ancestors did it. I told you at the top of the program that we watched the video of our ancestor, Sister Mawana Coyote, looked right in the camera, right before her physical transition, right before her death, and told us, don't be afraid. Stand up and do the right thing for your people. So we heard you, Sister Mawana, and we are going to do our best to do that. And once our people lose that fear of our enemies, we can take the steps to change this. Why the hell do we have to beg for a job from these capitalist crackers when we have the most resource-rich continent on the planet Earth? We need to organize and make these clowns beg us for some resources. That's what Pan-Africanism is about. That's what we're going to do. Buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. Organization is the only solution. Enjoy the rest of your day. Forward ever, backwards never.